And so our 3 goals that we have for today, or our outcomes that we want to describe what PBIS is, the what and the why, like why are we doing this? We want to define the features of Tier 1. So Tier 1 is what you guys will be more than likely engaging in on a regular basis. And then some of the essentials of Tier 2 and 3, as you might also participate in some of those activities. So just a little bit of the history of the school, recent school legislation. I believe like in 2012, somewhere around there, a few assembly bills came out, and they wanted schools to use more alternative forms to discipline than suspension. So rather than always suspend or expel students, what are other things that we can use in our toolbox? So schools were mandated to do this. And then also some of the ways students were oftentimes expelled for like having fake weapons and pills, and they wanted to shift that so we weren't expelling as many students. So they could no longer do that. And then also you had to, you can expel a student for a year, but then they had to go back to their school of origin. So those were the 3 big pieces. And then 2 bills that they were trying to pass through, but they were vetoed. But it's just important to know because it's probably going to come up again, is that we eliminated expulsions for K, which was defiance and disrespect. So we can't just send out students and eventually expel them for defiance, habitual defiance. And then the last item is just that schools that had a high percentage of suspensions and expulsions, and our district was there, they wanted to mandate PBIS. So we didn't do this as a mandate, but we looked at our percentage and we thought we needed to do something to better support our students. So what we found, a big part of the scope of the problem was that our students with disabilities, they were being suspended at a much higher rate than our students without disabilities. So it was like a 13% for those with disabilities and 6% for those without disabilities. And so, and one of the things is we had a question was the suspensions even working? So oftentimes you'll see the same students habitually having problematic behavior. So it wasn't acting as a deterrent, it wasn't changing behavior. So we needed some other practices that we could implement that would change behavior. And oftentimes it might even, they were finding that it might even increase problem behavior. So we kind of break down the relationships we have with kids as we suspend them, and then it's really hard to change those ways. So the data is collected through every student that's suspended or expelled. We have an electronic system that collects all that data. And we look at and part of PBIS, we actually invested in a new system that looks at where is it happening, what time of day, what type of students are being suspended. So PBIS, like we've said, it's a framework that we work within to support students. It's not like a program or like a book that you can buy and just okay, go implement this. It's a team of people that actually are deciding and putting things together based on the school demographics, socioeconomic status, all the information that we know about a school, and then we take that and using all the data that we have and putting a system together. It's research-based, so it's been around in California for over 20 years. And we know that it works and it has the outcomes that we want to see. It's always using PBIS, positive behavior intervention systems. It's always using positive language. So instead of saying, don't do this, no, 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 we're saying what we want them to do. So, oh, we want you to be seated, or, it's always phrasing things in a positive light so that we're telling them what we want them to do versus, always having that negative connotation. It's behaviorally based, so we're always putting systems together within our classrooms, in our schools, so that we can change our environment and then we can maximize learning. It's data driven. We've talked a little bit about that already from the questions. So we're always looking at attendance data. We're looking at our office discipline referrals. We're looking at whatever data, grades that we can get our hands on. We're trying to look at that and make sense of it. and it's also a district initiative. So here's the first video. And this was a Salinas High last school year did a video just to kind of show like the overall to students what is PBIS all about. So that's what you'll see here. Okay, so the why of PBIS. So when we do PBIS and we engage in all these things that we'll talk about as we go, the idea is that we're spending less time disciplining students and more time teaching them, and just creating the overall positive climate within the school, better interactions between staff and students, and then also that we're just making it more equitable. So one thing we didn't mention yet is that we also saw our students of color, so our Latinos and our African American students, they were suspended at a much higher rate than their counterpartners. So we wanted to make sure that we have systems that are fair for all students, that we treat everyone in a manner that is respectful, and we look more at the systems we have in place versus how we feel on that day. So PBIS brings that to the table also. So once again, PBIS is a multi-tiered framework. So as students need more intervention, we're able to provide that. And it's a framework that also looks at establishing that really strong positive social culture. So some of the evidence-based, some of the features that we'll talk about are the prevention part, the teaching of the lessons and expectations, our acknowledgement systems, our consistent way that we consequence problem behavior, how we're going to collect data, like we've already talked about a little bit, and then how are we going to support students that might need more individualized support. So these are the two main guys, George Sagai and Rob Horner out of the University of Oregon, who have developed this whole school-wide system. And once again, trying to look at the whole school and making sure that not only our teachers are involved in these systems, but our staff, our administrators, and everyone on campus. And a lot of those reasons that PBIS works, because it increases like the academic outcomes, decreases behavior problems, makes it fair for all students, and then also it's just an efficient way to deal with these behaviors. So what does the research say about PBIS? So the research that we see, I'll just mention a few of them, is that we see the reduction in problem behavior. We see increased academic performance, so students feel better about themselves, so they tend to perform better. We see a greater attendance rates, the perception of safety, and the list goes on and on. You could read here. So oftentimes when students, and previous to our PBIS systems, sometimes when we would oftentimes react to student behavior. So when students misbehave, it might be easier to remove them, or say, I need, these kids are tough, this certain class, I need to be removed. Or we try to like change maybe the placement, the program. So how can we be more proactive and more positive without trying to just get rid of the student? So that's, and so not being as reactive, being more proactive. So also going back to some of the previous policies, when students would misbehave, the staff would try to get tougher. And a lot of you know about like the zero tolerance policy. So you could never do X, Y, and Z or you'll be expelled. Or we increase the surveillance, so let's just monitor them more, let's catch them being bad type of stuff. Let's suspend them more, expel students more. Let's give them more training. Let's look at different programs. So these are the previous ways that we approached behavior. But we need to realize that we're in error if we always think kids are doing bad things and we only look at what the bad things that they're doing, because we can teach them what we want them to do through these systems. So through PBIS, or through, like if we're just looking at the bad side of things or suspensions and problem behavior, you know, we try to like control things, or we try to look at what type of triggers and reinforcers, and we actually might have reinforced the behaviors we don't want to see. So we'll talk a little bit about how we, through our reactions, we can, students oftentimes are looking for attention, or maybe they're looking to escape a difficult task. So the way we react, we can trigger them, and we can actually reinforce behaviors that we don't want to see. Another thing that, you know, through PBIS, we want to shift away from the problem being this child to what can we do to change the problem behavior. And then we also want to strengthen the relationships. So students are not born with bad behaviors, and they can learn if we teach them the way we want them to behave. Sometimes we don't communicate these things. So here we're going to talk about the tiered system. So So the first tier, which is the universal interventions, and we're also moving into probably just academic, behavioral, social, emotional, all the continuum of universal. So what do we do for students? And so as far as the universals are, for PBIS, we provide lesson plans. We provide those consistent ways that will to address problem behaviors. And then we also consistently, we're teaching, working with staff on that. And the idea is that most of the students, if we provide these universal systems, 80% of our students should respond to those things, and they won't need any other types of supports. The tier 2 systems, so that's the place in yellow, is for students who might need a little bit more support. So what we call targeted interventions. So at our school sites, the students that might need a little bit more support, we have after-school programs, tutorials. We have a program called Check-in, Check-out that we'll talk in more detail. We have mentoring programs. We're going to have like small group social emotional groups that students will be meeting. So students that might need a little bit more support, they'll have those targeted groups, and you guys will be able to refer kids for those types of supports. And then the last piece of the tier is the what we call intensive individualized intervention. So we write a specific plan for the student. So students that might have a severe problems social emotionally, they'll get individualized counseling or therapy. They might get individualized what we call functional behavioral assessments and programs, and they might get what we call wraparound. So what community-based resources can we pull from to support these students? So what PBIS is all about is looking at the data, what information pieces, and then we look at what are we doing, what practices are we putting together for students, and what systems are we needing to change. So it's like this continual circle of looking at for better outcomes through data, practices, and systems. So we're always reevaluating where we're at. And some of the big ideas are that we want to be proactive, and we want to serve all students so that we can have better academic and diminish the problem behavior. So this is a little cartoon. So one of the items says, "I started a fire in the lab on purpose. How about you?" And the other one says, "I tapped my pencil on my desk during study time." So this is funny, but we oftentimes see this in schools where students might be sent out for very differing reasons. and for tapping his pencil, you'll see that. And so we want to have those consistent ways of dealing with those problem behaviors. So our tier 1, and this is these are the pieces of the tier that you guys will be engaged in, is the school-wide expectations. So you've seen like Salinas High, they had safe, honorable, sensible. So you'll see 3 to 5 school expectations, whatever your school might be. I know some of them have safe, responsible, respectful. Some of them have the 3 R's, you're ready to learn, and respectful, responsible. So they'll be a little bit different at each site, but you'll have those school-wide expectations. And then you'll also have the lesson plans, so where you're explicitly teaching students what you want to see. So everything, like we said, already falls under that positive language. So what does it mean to be safe? What does it mean to be responsible? What does it mean to be respectful? Those are your matrices, and that's how the lesson plans will be developed. And those lesson plans are developed based in data. So like we talked about, if we see a lot of students with disrespectful language, or we see a lot of students that might be using drugs on campus, we create lessons to support those areas and to be proactive. And the next item is that we reinforce the behaviors that we want to see. So we provide acknowledgement systems where we go around and we reinforce that was really respectful, I like the way you did whatever, or that was really responsible, the way you turned in your homework. And that's a huge part of the system, the acknowledgement system. And then the last item is the office discipline referral. So 3 years ago, we changed and we revamped our office discipline referral. District-wide, we all use the same form, and we'll pass it out and look at it. And it's a little bit confusing at first. It's already been passed out, but we have a video to kind of help support that too. So these are one of the examples of the behavioral expectation grid. So basically, this is a place where I think their roles were achievement, respect, responsibility. And what does it look like in the classroom? What does it look like in the hallway? What does it look like in the cafeteria, outside, in the locker room? So you can get the idea of what is the expectation and what it might look like in the different locations of the school. And this is one of our schools that put together a pamphlet to pass out to parents. What does it mean to be safe, honorable, sensible at school events versus in the restroom? So those are the expectations that you'll be seeing as you go around campus, the expectations and then the grids to see what it might look like. So here is one of the schools, and we'll see another video. This is the lesson that they put together for the students, and you as a teacher would show the lesson and then have some type of discussion with your students afterwards. So you got an idea of, and one thing I wanted to say also is we see at our sites, most of our sites, that the #1 problem behavior district-wide is defiance and disrespect. So a lot of it has to do with the language students use. So these types of lessons have been very proactive and very useful to school sites. The next big piece that we've talked about is acknowledgement systems. So we're always tying our acknowledgement systems to our school-wide expectations. So we've talked a lot about respect, responsible, as being major common school-wide expectations. So make sure when you give an acknowledgement, you let them know why they're getting that. Thank you for being respectful. Thank you for being responsible or motivated, whatever your school-wide expectations are, if you can connect those things. And oftentimes the school will have like weekly or monthly drawings. Students can win, like Rotary snack food from the snack bar, athletic event tickets, front of the lunch line passes at our middle schools. They really like those. And then any type of school swag, so they have sweatshirts, t-shirts, water bottles, and all those types of things. Yes. The PBIS teams are always working very hard to be creative on how to support students, how to acknowledge things. Thank you for sharing that. I think it's very important that we create that culture where we're all acknowledging each other, teachers, students, staff, from the top down. I think it's all important, and we all feel valued, which actually takes me to the next slide. It's this whole idea of acknowledging students or having good interactions it works. They find the research says you'll hear 4-to-1 or 5-to-1, but it's a good idea to have at least 4 or 5 positive interactions for every behavioral correction or negative interaction you have with a student. So it's inevitable that you're going to have to correct students, but the ones that are corrected a lot, they need a lot more positive interactions between the adults and the students. So we find this works not only for students, but the research shows that business teams, the highest performing business teams, they said 5.6 positive interactions to every correction. And then also married couples also find that 5-to-1, so when they have verbal or speech acts interactions, 5-to-1, and then also for more observed, so nonverbal interactions is 4-to-1. So we always want to make sure we're having way more positive things going on with our students, and so that when we do correct them, it doesn't break down that relationship that we have. So thank you for sharing that, because that all goes along with that. Just as far as PBIS, since 2000, this chart graphs all the way up to 2015, you'll see that in the United States, you have more and more schools adopting this framework. So we've talked a lot about behavior. So I want you to understand this when you go back to your sites, because you'll hear this terminology of minors and then majors. So those two types of behavior problems. So minors are when teachers have, within the classroom, minor incidences are where teachers have the authority to manage the behavior. And every school site has a different system. I'll show you an example of one of what's a minor and what's a major. I'm sure if you have a middle schooler, high schooler, an alternative school, it's all a little bit different on how we're going to address behavior. So there's things that teachers are given the authority to deal with. And typically, like after 3 or 4 minor incidences, then it becomes a major or an office managed discipline. So, and major incidences are those that interfere with the ongoing education of others. They threaten the safety of others, or they're really severe and they need a more intervention. So, like I said, they're going to look a little bit different at every site, but the idea is that within the classroom that there's some intervention happening with the teacher and their minor way to deal with minor incidences, and then there's office managed behaviors. So this is an example, I think this was Mount Toro's example of they called it class managed versus office managed. So there's a whole flow chart, what's minor, what's a major. These systems were created by the school sites. So they oftentimes put something together, and then they would come back together and hash it out with their teachers, and everyone would come upon agreements, and then they move forward with these types of things. So like teacher managed are tardiness, poor work habits, not completing assignments, a willful defiance of school authority. So teachers manage these things within the classroom. And some examples of office managed were chronic behaviors, which were like happening 2 to 4 times, fighting, battery, assault, those types of things were more office managed. So every school site, like I said, they should give you some type of a flow chart of behaviors and how to go about dealing with problem behavior. And so this site also has another chart where they talk about the flow, what happens if it's the first time, send them to a counselor. If it's repeated, then we might send them to Cambio, which is an alternative site for students, or this is when it's going to go to suspension. So just so teachers and everyone's on the same page and we're treating all students in an equitable manner. Does anyone have any questions or comments about so far? What is that? Cambio, yeah, that's an alternative site. So sometimes students, when they're suspended for several days, they'll be sent to Cambio, which is near the Salinas Education Center, Mount Toro, in that area. Okay, so now, oops. Wait, hold on one second. Okay, so when we do have to correct a behavior, some things that you might want to tell a student or ask them is, what are the rules? What are the school-wide rules? For this particular school, it was be more, so motivated, organized, respectful, engaged. So was your behavior motivated? Was it engaged? Was it respectful? And then what do you need to do? So just kind of redirecting them. So those are some ways you might want to correct behavior. And then also, how do you acknowledge proper behavior? So making sure you say thank you for being motivated, thank you for being respectful, and so on. So making sure we're acknowledging students with the acknowledgement cards, whatever system your school has, and then also verbally letting them know why you're giving that to them. So the next thing is another video. And so if everyone, actually, you guys, we handed out the office discipline referral. If we can just, I don't know, is there any other extra copies? Let me see. If you guys can just pull those out. Here, did we already pass them out? I think can I have one? That's what I just needed. Okay, so I just wanted to be able to see one. So you'll see that the major components of these office discipline referrals are who engaged in the behavior, when did the behavior happen, where did the behavior happen, what was the problem behavior, and then why. So the number 5, the why, was the part that was more we had to do a little bit of training and figuring out the why part. So we created a video to kind of help support that. But basically, the why is the possible motivation. So why do you think this behavior is happening? So is it happening, are they cussing you out because the math test is too difficult and they're trying to escape that? Or are they doing it to gain attention from their peers? Or are they really mad at you and trying to get your attention? So the why has to do with, are they trying to, like I said, get attention, or avoid your attention, obtain something, avoid a task, avoid peers, avoid a certain adult, or do you just not know? And this is helpful. So for students who habitually engage in problem behavior, this helps our teams decide how to support the students. So if at all possible, it's important that you fill that piece out. So I want to go ahead and show you the video that'll kind of do a little bit better job of describing what's going on. And this next activity, if you can just share with your teams and discuss 3 teacher managed student behaviors and what might you do for those behaviors, and then 3 office managed student behaviors and what steps you might take for those behaviors.